How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.
is the end. There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final genocide. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final
What's up, guys? Welcome to our second spy stream of the day. Except right now, we're going to be watching a live socialist presentation. And guys, guess what? We are about to break Stacy's heart. We are about to break her heart because there is no way she can snitch on us. And there is no way that she's going to stop what's coming unless the people doing the presentation just cancel it. And if they cancel it, that's a win for us. So that's fine. Hey, before we get into it, I do want to do a great big shout out to 3 people. I want to do a shout out to James, a shout out to Frank, and a shout out to Kazmar, all who donated at the end of the last stream. And especially Frank, I think, donated some channel memberships right as I went offline. So I want to do big W's to Frank. Also to Kazmar, thank you guys for donating channel memberships. We are now within 12 channel memberships of our goal for the day. So if you want to support the work I'm doing, one of the very best ways to do so is by donating channel memberships. That spreads the wealth throughout the community so that more people can come to Spy Stream when I do them as supporter exclusive. Today, I am not doing Spy Stream as a supporter exclusive. Today, I am doing it publicly. And you're about to figure out why. You're about to figure out why. Now, normally, I would actually be doing this as a supporter exclusive because every single time I do this, people manage to screw it up. Every single time I spy stream, like we're about to spy stream right now, people come in and spoil it for us. Every single time. So I said if I was ever going to do this again, we were just going to do it as a supporter exclusive. And then I changed my mind. But the good news is I don't think anyone can fuck it up because we're watching a live stream streamed to Haymarket Books' YouTube channel literally right now, starting in about 5 minutes. We are watching a public live stream on the internet on a socialist book publisher, the socialist book publisher, the largest socialist book publisher in the United States. And do you know what's funny? It seems they've turned the chat off. They turned their chat off. Guys, do you remember when we colonized Haymarket Books' chat? For people who aren't here, there is actually, for people who are newer here, and thank you so much, Old Sub Sailor, for the super chat. Hoping Stacy sews up so we can laugh at her again. Oh, I'm sure she will, and that's fine with me. Thanks so much. Guys, do you guys know, for new people, Haymarket Books actually has an entire presentation where they're just crying about me? Literally, there's an entire presentation where they were crying about me, and we watched that presentation live. and we colonized their chat. We took it over. We said, whose chat, our chat, whose chat, our chat, over and over and over again in their chat until they shut the chat off and wouldn't let us talk anymore because they were crying about me. Their sound is on, so we know they're starting soon. Oh gosh, hang on. I'm getting the sound in 2 ears, so I've got this up somewhere else on my screen. Hang on. W's in the chat for Cynthia as I find where else I have this fucking presentation on my screen. Oh no, I have 8,000 fucking screens open. Hang on. Hang on. Hang on. We're going to find it. Found it. Oh, I can hear myself talk again. You guys couldn't hear that, but I could. Okay, it was blaring in my ear. You just couldn't hear it. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for the channel memberships. Really appreciate it. Cynthia getting us within 2 channel memberships of our goal. So Haymarket Books is the largest socialist book publisher in the United States, and they do presentations all the time about what they believe. And they are hosting a live presentation tonight called Abolish ICE, Abolish the Border. And so we're going to watch it live. And there's no way the retards can screw it up for me, because normally what screws up about this is the retards go into Haymarket Books' chat. They cause problems. Listen, guys, when we're watching live YouTube presentations, here is my rule. And this is true with the private presentations too. We do not disrupt them. We don't disrupt them. We don't raid their chat. We don't spam their chat. We don't ask retard questions. We want to ask good questions so they actually answer them, and then we can get them on video answering them, telling us what they believe. Thanks, Cynthia, for the super chat. Hi, Stacy. We're everywhere. Hi, Stacy. Ain't shit you can do about it. They turn their chat off. So we don't have that problem today because they've turned the chat off. So this is going to be great, guys. This is win, 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 win. This is a win because we're going to get to sit back and watch a live presentation of communists telling us what they think about ICE and the border. And we're going to be able to listen to them without the chat being disrupted by any hooligans that don't want to follow basic rules and decorum about doing this. So guys, I want you to know, I'm probably not going to talk much over this presentation because it is a live presentation. But I mean, I can't stop and pause it and stuff like that. I may make a remark here or there, but like usually when we're doing this, I try to stay pretty quiet. If I have something to say, I will chat it in, but I may also speak over it too. We're going to have to play it by ear. We're going to have to see how it goes. It's a little bit looser when we're talking about YouTube recordings, because with a YouTube recording, we still have the original recording. Whereas if I'm in a Zoom call or something, my recording might be the only recording that exists. So sometimes when we're doing YouTube stuff, I do tend to talk over it a little bit more. But just know that I can't pause the presentation. I'm not going to be doing the whole rewinding thing. It's a live presentation. We're going to listen to it live. We're going to hear what they have to say. All right. Hey, thanks, David, for being a member of the channel for 2 months. Seems Stacy underestimated the power of 150 people. Much love, Karlyn. Keep on keeping it. Yeah, Stacy really did underestimate the reach of the Democratic Socialists of America spy stream, didn't she? Really appreciate that. All right, they should be getting started soon, guys. And sit back, relax, enjoy. If you have questions, please do let me know in the chat. I love answering questions, as you guys know. Oh.
Radical politics. You're not broke if you're taxing rich people.
We break production for profit and we replace it by production for need.
This event is brought to you by Haymarket Books. Now more than ever, it is critical to support independent publishers, independent bookstores, and independent voices. There are 2 ways you can do this today. First, by buying books from Haymarket at haymarketbooks.org.
By the way, this is how they're funded. Book publishing is a big part of it. Haymarket Books makes over $6 million a year selling books.
The following event will be recorded and shared afterwards on the Haymarket Books YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the channel, like
No, I'm
this
not going to
video
turn off the
now,
on-screen chat.
and share it with as many people as possible. If you like this event, be sure to catch these upcoming events in Haymarket's live stream series. You can register for these upcoming events on the Haymarket Books Eventbrite page. If you miss an event, you can listen to the recording afterward by subscribing to our podcast, Haymarket Live, wherever you get your podcasts. Before we begin,
Guys, remember, please take this seriously. I don't mind you guys making fun of people a little bit. I truly don't. I don't mind people having fun in the chat. We're watching boring stuff. Sometimes you need to have fun, but please just take this seriously. These people are not stupid. They're not mentally ill. They're not dumb. They're not lazy. They are highly motivated and they're winning and they're talking about overthrowing the government. So while I don't mind a little bit of, fun and levity and things like that in the chat, just please take this seriously so that other people here can take it seriously.
chat window, and we'll get to those later in the program. Thanks for joining us today.
There's no
Our
chat,
event will
though.
begin shortly.
It's called Death Panel. That's ominous. They're pretty clear about what they believe, huh, guys? Yo, thanks, old sub-sailor!
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for
Hi,
tonight's
Beatrice.
panel, which is called Abolish ICE, Abolish the Border, with Harsha Walia, Silky Shah, and myself, Beatrice Adler-Bolton. This panel is organized by Haymarket Books and Death Panel Podcast, and I am the co-host of the Death Panel Podcast
That's a
and the
podcast.
co-author with Artie Virkant of the books
Yo!
called Communism,
W
published by Verso
thanks!
in 2022, and All Care for All People, which is forthcoming from Haymarket Books.
Cool.
Artie is taking point on childcare duties tonight
Yeah.
and sends his regrets that he can't join us. But I speak for both of us when I say that I am so
thank you.
deeply humbled and honored to be in discussion with Harsha and
Yo,
Silky, two
WAC Cat.
absolutely brilliant
you.
comrades whose decades of organizing and uncompromising analysis have helped so many of us
W.
understand the violence of immigration
Malcolm,
policing
thanks,
and how to
guys.
fight it. Silky Shah is the executive director of Detention Watch Network, a national coalition building power to abolish immigration detention in the US. She's also the author of the book Unbuild Walls, Why Immigrant Justice Needs Abolition, published by Haymarket in 2024. She's worked as an organizer on issues related to immigration detention, the prison industrial complex, and racial and migrant justice for over 20 years. And Harsha Walia is the award-winning author of Border and Rule, published by Haymarket in 2021, and Undoing Border Imperialism, published by AK Press in 2013.
AK Press is another
Trained in the
socialist
law,
publisher.
she is a community organizer and campaigner in migrant justice, anti-capitalist, feminist, and anti-imperialist movements,
Anti-capitalist.
including No One is Illegal and Women's Memorial March Committee. And thank you to you all at home for gathering with us for this really urgent discussion on the brutal immigration policing happening where I'm based in Minneapolis and St. Paul and the Twin Cities metro area since early December 2025, as well as in cities across the United States from Los Angeles to New Orleans to Chicago and beyond for the last year. Over the past months here in the Twin Cities, thousands of federal agents were deployed in Operation Metro Surge, which exported border militarization into interior cities under the guise of a quote-unquote migration crisis. Even as White House Border Czar Tom Homan announced today that the operation would end and federal agents would be drawn down over the next week, the logic behind it remains intact. The temporary drawdown is predicated on increased cooperation between local law enforcement and ICE, including agreements for county jails to notify federal agents about detainee release dates so that ICE can take custody. That agreement, heralded by Homan as progress, underscores the really important central point tonight, which is to truly abolish ICE, we have to abolish the border regime that enables it.
That means the government.
Because tonight we convene to confront a moment when the violence of border regimes is no longer deniable even for those most studiously committed to looking away. ICE rang in the new year by executing Keith Porter Jr., a 43-year-old Black father of 2 in Los Angeles. And so far this year, they have murdered 8 more people. Luis Gustavo Nunez Carceres, Geraldo Lunas Campos, Victor Manuel Diaz, Parody Law, Renee Nicole Good, Luis Beltran Yanez Cruz, Heber Sanchez Dominguez, and Alex Preddy. We're told that this is about so-called security. We're told that this is about the so-called law, that, you know, this is a so-called crisis at the border, but there is no crisis at the border. The crisis is a political economy that builds walls and cages to manage the wreckage of its own making. And what we're witnessing is a governing order that relies on mass warehousing, confinement to stabilize the contradictions that it produces. The problem is a system so fundamentally violent that it needs incarceration to sustain itself. So tonight, we're not here to ask how to train ICE better, how to make ICE kinder. We're not here to politely debate procedural tweaks. We're here to confront the governing architecture of borders. The border regime is a system of sorting life and death, mobility and immobility, care and abandonment. And abolition is often mischaracterized or misunderstood as hopelessly utopian. But what is truly, absolutely unrealistic is believing that more enforcement will produce safety. What is unrealistic is believing that slightly more humane cages can solve the problems of an empire of displacement. Abolition is the only position that actually grapples with root causes, because the question is no longer whether or not the system is violent or justified. The question is whether we're prepared to end it. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Silky and then Harsha as we each speak to and just take a second to contextualize our current moment.
Thank you, Beatrice. So honored to be here with both of you. I both have just learned so much from both of you in this context. And I think in this moment when we're figuring out so much, where there's like so much that's devastating, but also so much that's inspiring, I think this is a perfect time for this conversation. I think there's a lot of different points at which we can kind of look at how we got to this point. For the purposes of this, at least this little part of the conversation, I'm gonna take us back to like this last year and sort of what's happened in the context of Trump 2.0, just to kind of contextualize like how this escalation has happened in particular. It's been absolutely relentless. I mean, I think there's a lot that we predicted in terms of the jumping of scale and the quote unquote flooding the zone and a lot of different policy changes, but in so many ways, it's much further beyond. In my 20 plus years of working against the immigration detention system, I think I could have never really fathomed where it is going now and what it has become. And so I think when we look at it, I mean, in a lot of ways, a lot of it is jumping scale. So you have many more agreements between local police and ICE to have local police work as immigration enforcers. You have a lot more collaboration between law enforcement across the board, a lot of law enforcement that's being redirected to do a lot of immigration enforcement. And then you have a lot more detention, again, jumping of scale, like, and not just, I think there's a lot of attention on private prisons for good reason, but it's, there's more growth on the public side of the use of immigration detention there is on the private side right now. There's so many more county jails being used, Bureau of Prisons facilities, military bases, and private prisons, and I'll get to some of what's happening now with the warehouses. So all of that is what we anticipated. We anticipated all of those things going up, enforcement sort of skyrocketing at that scale. But there was also all these various policy departures and sort of strategies of spectacle that really also kind of like terrified people and really put into question, okay, how far can this go? What does this mean for people? I think one of the very obvious examples is the targeting of immigrant activists who were protesting in solidarity with Palestine and particularly attacks using immigration as a guise for attacks on free speech, targeting people for essentially thought crimes. I mean, that is a marked shift, and I think that was really scary. But it was also something that was intensely unpopular and didn't sort of rise to the scale that it could still. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind. But it's important to sort of recognize there has been a lot of opposition, and these things aren't just kind of continuing in the way they had planned. Similarly, the offshoring of detention to the terrorism confinement center in El Salvador, again, a lot of different countries in the world, and Harsha can speak to this, have used offshoring of detention. It's not something that's been common in the US context. This is sort of new terrain, and we're seeing that happen more. There was a push to use Guantanamo, a capacity of 30,000 beds at Guantanamo for immigration detention. Those things are actually quite difficult to do, and they aren't really happening, even though these are sort of like trial balloons to kind of scare us. And so there was a lot of like that happening, and this sort of fear of what could be. People being deported to South Sudan and Eswatini, to countries they've never been to before, never heard of before, as they're, technically deportations, but then being held still in government facilities in some form of incarceration when they're there. So those things are continuing, and a lot of the sort of severity of deportation is increasing. I think that's really, really scary. But from my perspective, the most significant, hands down, most significant thing that happened in the last year, and something that sort of set up what we are seeing in Minneapolis, was the passage of the reconciliation bill in July, where we saw $170 billion for immigration enforcement, a scale that is hard to really wrap your head around. And since then, we went from having 10,000 ICE agents, still a massive, massive entity of law enforcement, to 22,000 ICE agents, which, doubling in size, in just a matter of 4 months, that many more agents. And again, what we were seeing with the sort of siege in cities were use of the National Guard, working with local law enforcement, bringing Border Patrol up to different cities across the country. Now, ICE, with this funding, is becoming Trump's sort of occupying army. And so I think there's an element, and we will talk about this more, of just sort of like the shifts around ICE and what that means in terms of relationship to other law enforcement. But I do think this in particular, this funding is sort of the intent is to kind of like have ICE do Trump's bidding, right? And with detention, we're seeing, the highest capacity we've ever seen. So around 70,000 people are currently detained at any given time. To sort of give a sense of what that means, in 2019, which was the last time we had the sort of highest number, which was around 50 to 55,000 people detained at any given time, over the course of the year, 500,000 people went through the detention system. So now we're at 70,000. Everything is indicating the numbers are going to reach something like 120,000 or beyond. And I think there's a lot we can do to stop that. But, that is reaching the scale that mirrors the era of Japanese American incarceration during World War II. So we're really, really jumping scale. And people are, some people spend a couple days in detention. Some people spend a couple weeks. People spend years sometimes in detention. So again, you have hundreds and thousands of people entering the system that is deteriorating in every single way. And it's a horrifying system in its own right. Like, there's no question there's been deaths in detention. There's been negligence. There's been so much that is harsh about this system. But to give a sense, last year we had a record number of deaths in detention. In the first 3 weeks of 2026, 6 people died in detention centers in the US. Like, really, when you think about what's happening on the streets and the way ICE is treating people on the streets and the roundups that are happening, just really imagining what is happening behind closed doors in detention, it's so scary and sort of terrifying to think about, especially in the context now where we're seeing this sort of, push for warehouses, essentially, concentration camps where you have 10,000 bed facilities across the country that they are starting to put up. And so this is a big shift that we're seeing right now. And I think, I'll leave it there. And on this sort of like abolitionist piece, I think there's just two things I want to name as we sort of have this conversation. Is one is like, so many people talk about this in terms of an abolitionist lesson. Like, if you accept that some people are deserving of a certain type of treatment, usually the scope of like who can be subject to that type of treatment expands. And that is what we've seen over time. And that's what we're seeing now. Many, many years of an argument that some immigrants are good and some immigrants are bad have gotten us to a place where all immigrants are bad in the eyes of this administration and this government right now. And so therefore, everyone is a target. And I think we need to really think about that when we make our arguments, and we can talk about that more. Similarly, old immigrants are good, but new immigrants are bad is also another sort of strategy to say, hey, like we're, again, expand. Actually, no, it doesn't matter if you've been here that long. We're just gonna, put you in detention. So that's, I think, a really important abolitionist lesson of like, if we keep throwing certain people under the bus, like it just expands. And of course, everyone focuses on this is going to happen to U.S. citizens. I think that's important. It's mostly happening to immigrants. It's mostly happening to people of color and working class communities. In terms of infrastructure, in terms of the second thing, I would just say infrastructure. Republicans and Democrats both built these systems. Democrats have repeatedly given more money to ICE and CBP over and over again. And so I think, to me, this particular like expansion of the warehouses, this is industrialization. This is what they are doing. And it's possible because of the reconciliation bill. It's possible because of the infrastructure. So we can talk about laws and policy all day long, but when they have the money and the resources, they build up these systems. And as anybody who does this work against these systems, like once they build it up, it's that much harder to bring it down. And we've seen that time and time again. So I think as we understand what is happening now, really keeping those two pieces in mind from a sort of like abolitionist lens. I think you might be muted, Beatrice, if you're talking. Or
Harsha, do you want to go next?
Can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for that, Silky, and thank you so much, Beatrice and Deaf Panel and Haymarket for convening us. I'm really humbled to be in this conversation alongside. I'm not in the so-called United States. I'm based in Vancouver, which is unceded Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish lands. And I think, part of what I want to offer today in this conversation is to really, when we're thinking about the border and how it operates and where it operates, is to really understand how critical the border is to colonialism. So as we've seen in Minneapolis and elsewhere across the United States, it's not a coincidence that, for example, Indigenous people are also being impacted by ICE and border enforcement, right? Because we see the ways in which the border is not only a colonial imposition, but also it is a very clear function of racism in terms of who is being targeted and who gets caught up in the racial profiling of enforcement. So I think, following on what Silky was saying, I think, in the same ways that it is so important to understand that border enforcement is a bipartisan practice, right? That it is baked into the United States. I think drawing on that and expanding on that is so crucial to understand how bordering is not a uniquely US practice. Like, this is something that we are seeing escalate all around the world. And in fact, many of these questions of scale and practices of externalization and outsourcing that Silky mentioned are things that the US is borrowing and learning from other places. And the reason that that's important for me is because, I come to the work of borders through a lens of internationalism, right? Which is to understand that what is happening around the world is being replicated and implicates people's liberation movements around the world. And so I think, that is something to keep in mind, is because it can sometimes become really easy, in the same way that we fixate on what Republicans are doing or this administration is doing, is to also lose sight of what's happening with the border everywhere. And increasingly, we are seeing that one of the linchpins of fascism all around the world, of right-wing movements around the world, is anti-migrant racism and anti-migrant policies. Because the reality is, the far right has many contradictions. We know this, right? It's not a uniform agenda. There are many contradictions within factions of the right and fascist formations. But one of the most consistent things that we can trace across geographies in this moment is anti-migrant racism. And so that is one of the unifying factors of the far right around the world, because it is such a clear system of othering, right? Like, literally the idea of who is a migrant, like the entire category of migrant is constructed. There is nothing natural about it. It does not ascribe to a language group. It does not ascribe to like where you might belong in terms of your neighborhood, or what language you speak, or what faith you might practice, right? It is completely constructed on this artificial identity of where you're born and if you happen to cross a state border, right? Because people who cross within a state border are not typically considered migrants. Of course, we could make the argument that they are. And so it's a completely state constructed identity that creates a system of ordering, of dehumanization, and on which many racial markers can live, right? Because migrants in different places are racialized differently, but the fact that they can be named as a migrant becomes a key way to enforce that racism. So outside of, for example, white supremacist contexts, migrants may be, you may be a migrant in a country where you are actually racialized in the same way. So, for example, you might be a South Asian migrant in another South Asian country, right? But the ways in which you get racialized become specific to your migrant status. So outside of white supremacist context, the ways in which the far right unite is through this categorization of people as migrants. And so that's really critical to understand. I think in this moment, because these categories of who belongs and who doesn't belong and who is dehumanized really hinges on anti-migrant racism. And then we see that expand in so many different ways. The other thing I think in this moment, and you both talked about this, is how literally the border is everywhere, right? Like, there is nowhere to place the border. The border is literally not a line on the map. It is all forms of interior policing. It is all forms of border outsourcing. So if we're looking at the counterinsurgency warfare that is happening in the interior, and I think that is a crucial way to understand the border, right? The border is about sorting people, and it is a method of warfare. The border is warfare. It maintains ideas of territorial sovereignty that is fictional, that is based on empire and imperialism. And it is rooted in domestic policing as counterinsurgency, right? So all of the interior enforcement we are seeing is counterinsurgent domestic warfare. And at the same time, the externalization of the border we're seeing, whether that's, for example, to El Salvador, whether it's in Mexico, like Mexico now deports and detains at various times over the past few years more people than the United States does, right? At the behest of the United States, as we know, right? Through trade agreements, aid agreements, soft power, threats of trade wars, etc. And that is also a method of imperial warfare, right? To say, in order for you to maintain so-called good relations with us in trade agreements, you must accept border externalization. And this is happening all across the European Union, for example. The EU outsources all of its borders right now to the Sahel region of Africa. Everything we're seeing unfold in Libya, the horrific detention centers and enslavement. This is all imperial warfare. And so the border is literally everywhere. It can't be marked at a particular place. And I think that's also the level of scale, right? So it's scaling up in many ways, but also it's scaling geographically in ways that we have never seen before. where the division between the imperial core and the periphery collapses, because now it is actually countries in the periphery, like Mexico, like El Salvador, like Libya, like Rwanda, like Turkey, that are the frontiers of border militarization. And just this week, the European Union, just to add to this conversation about the United States, has signed and enacted a law that has to be, of course, ratified by member states, but that will basically look at deporting people from the EU to any other country that Europe has a trade agreement with that is considered safe. And so countries like India, like Morocco, like Egypt, right? So all countries that the EU has actually backed and installed fascist or militaristic authoritarian leaders in, like Modi in India, who is a fascist worse than Trump, I would argue. And these are countries where people can be deported to now from the European Union, even if they have never set foot in this country, right? So we will see a massive expansion of detention and deportation infrastructure, not only in the imperial core, but in countries all around the world that have historically been considered part of the periphery. And so I think understanding this multiplication of the border is so critical in terms of geographic scale and how the border is everywhere. And that will become a key piece of thinking about dismantling the US border regime, right? Because dismantling the US border regime will look like dismantling all of this infrastructure that is getting built up so-called elsewhere as well. And then the last 2 points that I wanted to make is to understand how borders really maintain global apartheid, right? This is not only about excluding people, through horrific deportation and kidnappings and border militarization, but the function that it serves is to maintain global apartheid. And how it does that is to continuously create zones where people who are disposable, who are considered expendable labor or so-called surplus population, are forced to live, right? So when people are deported from Canada, from the US, from the EU, they're being deported back to places, or now to these new safe third country places, where there are going to be exploited labor. Like, that is the function that global apartheid serves, is to segment people in order to ensure that racial capitalism can maintain a segmentation of labor that is always exploited and exploitable. And maybe the most stark example of this is the current regime has named a conundrum, which is that as they are enacting horrific violence, beefing up ICE, beefing up CBP, building up this entirely, this violent infrastructure that Silky was talking about, they have also had to give assurances to farm owners that they will somehow maintain a pool of cheapened farm labor, right? And so that is what racial capitalism does, is it doesn't just deport people, it creates the condition of deportability, which is what we're seeing in all of these cities where ICE is enacting this horror, is that people are actually now being forced to go to work under more precarious conditions and are often working for even less than they were before because of this fear of deportation. And so I think that's another piece to understand, which helps us move towards some of those perspectives that we're talking about, right? If we understand how critical immigration enforcement is to racial capitalism, to colonialism, to global empire, then we are less seduced by some of these fake reforms that would suggest we need more training, or, we need to, all the myriad of false solutions that have us looking one place without looking at the buildup elsewhere. I come to the migrant justice movement through a movement called No One Is Illegal, who for 20 years has always articulated no human being is illegal. And I will say, although it was a very lonely place, because very few people believe in that politics, it has allowed us to stay rooted in a politics that does not get seduced by reform, and that is able to place in this moment, to understand the links between, for example, the war on migrants and its intricate, deep interconnectedness to what is happening today with the Zionist enemy and the attacks on Gaza, the genocide in Palestine, to look at what is happening with growing fascism around the world, to look at the ways in which the war on drugs and the war on migrants is deeply interconnected, the way in which abolition is connected to migrant justice struggles. And so I would just offer that even though it may seem like it's a utopic horizon, it really is a moral compass that buttresses us against some of the heartache that comes from reformist politics, but can allow us to get shaken in the wind. And so I think, this conversation feels so important and so timely because it welcomes people into something that is much more expansive, and really is a liberatory horizon that we we desperately need it, right? Anything less than that is literally a deathscape for people right now.
We can't hear you if
You're muted.
Can you hear me now? Oh my gosh, it's very difficult to tell if you are muted, that you can see if your co-presenters are muted very easily. Apologies. Harsha and Silky, thank you so much for bringing in all of that with such care. It's really just a gift to think with you two tonight. And, in the context of what's been happening in Minneapolis, one of the things I just want to kind of bring in from on the ground to layer onto that is what resistance to this scaling has looked like. Now I'm speaking to you all from unceded Dakota land in Minneapolis. It's a city that's built on land that was stolen through forced displacement, through genocide, broken treaties, and the mass execution of 38 Dakota men in 1862, which is still the largest state execution in the history of the so-called United States. Over 2,000 Dakota were incarcerated in Fort Snelling then. It's the very same space which has served as a major hub for ICE during Operation Metro Surge. And I mentioned this sickening historical parallel because I think it helps to underline a very important point that Harsha made excellently, which is that the border regime that we are confronting today is not unique. It did not begin in our lifetimes. It did not begin in the United States. It did not begin with the Trump administration. It begins and ends with settler colonialism, with the theft of Indigenous land and the policing of Indigenous movement, the murder of Indigenous people. We're talking about a very old and familiar technology of domination. And any discussion of ICE is really incomplete without reckoning with the colonial function, because, ultimately abolition requires confronting the order that built these agencies and the racialized policing of movement that sustains them. And here in Minneapolis, the border regime has saturated everyday life since early December. Practices that were perhaps concentrated at the border, or what people felt like used to be concentrated at the border and in racially targeted zones, have now met people at home who once believed that the law would shield them. And I think that that's been really, important in terms of what the responses looked like. ICE conducts coordinated abductions with local law enforcement. Sheriff's deputies and federal agents operate seamlessly. At the same time, landlords file evictions against families already living under the threat of deportation. So property regimes and border regimes work together. One extracts rent, the other, contains movement and extracts obedience. And as I mentioned in my opening sort of remarks, White House Border Czar Tom Homan today announced this alleged drawdown of Operation Metro Surge this morning. And Homan attributed this so-called drawdown to what he calls unprecedented cooperation with state and local officials on enforcement logistics. But let's be really clear about what that means on the ground. It means that local law enforcement is formally stepping into immigration policing infrastructures. We are seeing the uniting of two arenas of criminalization that have terrorized Black and Brown communities for generations. And it's also worth saying that the idea that cooperation wasn't already happening is propaganda. This is, if anything, a symbolic claim of precedence, right? The idea that this is unprecedented collaboration is totally false. as local policing and immigration policing have always been united on the continuum of the PIC. Collaboration between federal and local officers has been a feature of Metro Surge already since the beginning. Materially, this means that the threat of deportation and detainment does not disappear with the bureaucratic end of a surge, right? In fact, in other cities where similar surges were declared over, the raids, the abductions, the community terror didn't stop once the press turned away. The violence simply returned to sort of more mundane rhythms. And in Minneapolis today, even during the very press conference where Homan announced the drawdown of the surge, people were being abducted by ICE on the streets all over the cities. This is a very grim illustration that state violence doesn't require theatrical occupation to function, right? It operates through collateral networks of law enforcement, through formal and informal cooperation, through the many infrastructures of policing that have always been with us. And immigration policing functions as a counterinsurgent health regime. It's a hyper disorganized system of organized extractive abandonment that produces vulnerability at a massive scale. And as Silky was laying out, that scale has been increasing. It targets entire communities through the targeting of individuals. So it spreads like a virus, and it operates through visible levels of power, like arrest, detention, deportation, but it also operates through subtle, persistent, and cumulative forms of violence that really irreparably reshape bodies and minds and intergenerational networks of care and social reproduction. So the goal is obedience via the instrumentalization of a population that is made to be chronically stressed, physiologically taxed, socially and economically fragmented from one another. Further, detention functions as a biological and necropolitical weapon. Overcrowding, inadequate ventilation and food, contaminated water, lack of medical care, these are all deliberate forms of border governance. And in this way, health is weaponized, becoming both a site of control and an instrument through which the state enforces, again, compliance, punishes non-compliance, and reinforces precarity in this sorting function of the border regime. So this is why I think it's helpful to frame border regimes as a counterinsurgent health regime. Counterinsurgency, again, aims to slow and fracture and discipline collective action before it can cohere. So this disciplines health before it can cohere. And counterinsurgency, it's effective, but it isn't working here in Minneapolis because oppression also produces counterpower, and communities respond with practices of care and solidarity that defy the regime's logic. So in our forthcoming book, All Care for All People, Artie and I call this counterpower insurgent care. And insurgent care is a collective strategy. It's decentralized and necessarily both multifaceted and multiply redundant. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But insurgent care is the refusal to shrink from shared vulnerability, turning mutual aid into a weapon to combat state abandonment and state oppression. And as we write about, when fascist forces come to your doorstep to kidnap your neighbor or you, what's needed most is actually care work, all types of care work. And the state really has been treating that as very dangerous. And that's because it is dangerous to the state. Part of the state's power is in designating who is deserving of care and who is deserving of abandonment. So when we refuse that, when we take care of each other anyway, even though some of us have been labeled migrants and therefore disposable, and some of us are labeled citizens and therefore, deserving of care, quote unquote, we are taking care of each other anyway is undermining that function and that power of labeling of the state. So this insurgent care work to counter the state's fascist and white supremacist agenda is exactly what we have witnessed here in Minneapolis for the last couple of months. And I want to talk about that care work in detail for a moment, though I'm going to be careful about how I speak about it because this work is still ongoing and, every day is Shut the Fuck Up Friday. But there has been a lot of discussion about the resistance work going on here or the January 23rd general strike. And I know a lot of people sort of know about the grocery delivery, maybe the rental assistance, but it is so extensive. What I think most people see from the outside barely even scratches the surface of the mutual aid that's going on here. It's truly so inspiring. In Minneapolis, the response has spontaneously grown into a massive, sprawling, decentralized network of self-organized resistance that frankly defies easy mapping or description. Across the cities, countless self-organized crews and cadres of people have emerged to meet immediate needs, like thousands of crews of people. It's highly relational. It's very deeply rooted in a hyper-local day-to-day solidarity. No central coordination, no central coordination. Through relationality, people are interconnected with other crews and the networks across the city, but there is no sort of central hub saying, you do this in this neighborhood, you do this here. So what we're seeing is emerging organically from people's immediate needs. Carpenters and handymen are going around and fixing kicked-in doors. Tow truck drivers and impound lots are rescuing abandoned cars, storing them for free, and then trying to get the word out that the vehicle owner has been kidnapped. So they're like serving the sort of reporting function on people who are being disappeared by the state. Neighbors are delivering food, supplies, clean laundry to families who are sometimes sheltering in their own home. Sometimes they're being hid in a friend or a neighbor's house. There's an incredibly comprehensive series of interventions to support pregnant people and people with new babies. Everything from breast milk donation, clothes, formula, furniture, toys, coordinating home deliveries and aftercare, and so much more. People are standing watch outside of daycares, outside of preschools, outside of elementary schools, middle schools, high schools every day. They are coordinating transportation, rapid response, data collection and analysis, and political education through hundreds and hundreds of autonomous rapid response groups. No one actually knows how many there are, but there are definitely more than, say, 100, 150. There is rent support, material support to bring people home after they've been released from detention, to rehouse people who've had a family member kidnapped who don't feel safe going back home, neighborhood barricades that prevent ICE from driving through while letting neighbors through, maintenance and care of public memorials, restaurants that are feeding people for free, opening their doors as warming shelters for people on patrol, spaces for medic trainings, there are community safety and defense patrols. There is every kind of distro that you could imagine going on right now. And folks here on the ground are not like patting themselves on the back saying, job done with Homan's announcement of a drawdown. Even the most liberal sort of participant in these networks knows that if this drawdown actually does materialize, that there will be even more of a need for mutual aid work to step up. While rapid response will also need to continue because the persecution and kidnapping of our neighbors will continue, even if it's only 150 agents instead of 3,000. And that's honestly just a small portion of what's happening here. I can't even name it all, but what's important to emphasize is that everything is oriented around stopping people from passing through this system of warehousing. It's about interrupting detainment, allowing people to shelter safely to avoid encounters where they could be detained, helping people who have passed through these warehousing systems of detainment. It's a living, adaptive form of organizing. Direct action is emerging from necessity. Solidarity is expressed through care. Resilience is growing from repeated everyday acts of mutual support. In the face of raids and repression, the city really has demonstrated power from below that's rooted in relationships, not hierarchy. And they've demonstrated that that can sustain communities and protect people who are being targeted by the state by creating this kind of model of self-organization that's really practical, but also politically transformative. So what's emerged from this sort of everyday practical organizing is a form of autonomous resistance that's both really adaptive, but also ungovernable. Minneapolis, I think, has demonstrated how thickly networked, multipolar social movements can really withstand state repression and survive precisely because they don't have hierarchical leadership. There are no central figures that can be targeted. There's no single funding source to be severed. There's no org to be splintered. The community itself is a living practice of mutual aid and collective survival that can't be replicated by traditional political campaigns. It can't be easily dismantled by the state. It's a city that in its daily care and vigilance has really refused to give in to fascism. And of course, all of this builds on groundwork laid in 2020, on groundwork laid by movements for Black and Indigenous liberation that have been rooted here in the Twin Cities for decades. Minneapolis has already lived through years of armed forces marching through our neighborhoods under the banner of safety. We've seen years of state violence justified with euphemisms about restoring order. And Minneapolis knows that the state depends on fear as a resource. Fear produces isolation, isolation produces obedience, and obedience makes policing easier. The whole apparatus of state violence, from border agents to local police, is calibrated to extract behavioral compliance through this kind of psychological pressure, not just physical force, which is why this tactic is actually so profound. It realizes what power really wants, which is not cooperation, not consent, but capitulation. And that calculus really breaks down when a community refuses the logic of fear. Minneapolis has not shrunk. People here don't become passive because a federal force parks in front of your house with cameras and guns. Instead, we've watched neighbors go to extraordinary lengths to take care of each other in very ordinary ways and keep each other safe, because terror, frankly, only works when people believe in the invincibility of the terrorizers. And what we're looking at in real time is an encounter between two logics, one that seeks to intimidate and deter through its visibility and its spectacle, and one that's responding by refusing to internalize that fear, by refusing to shrink into private life, by insisting that care and solidarity are the only real basis for safety, and power is not built from spectacular state violence, but from the fact that people will not stop taking care of each other, even when the state is literally holding a gun to their head. So that's all just sort of lay out a little bit of like what it's been like here on the ground. And I think with the stakes clear, I want to pivot us to our first discussion point, which is examining the structural function of immigration policing and sort of what to do about it, which we touched on a lot. But right now, as we talked about, we're seeing a lot of liberal commentary that treats ICE and CBP and DHS, border enforcement in general, as a series of bad apples that need to be fixed. Agents are too aggressive, too poorly trained, in need of better oversight. There was even some serious discussion of Good's murder being justified by untreated PTSD and ICE agent John Ross. But if we keep in mind the kind of heuristic that the purpose of a system is what it does, then the recent surge of immigration enforcement in the Twin Cities and beyond should force us to ask, I think, deeper questions, not just about form, but about function. And so I'd love if both of you could lay out thoughts on how we should understand the kind of structural role of immigration policing within the context of racial capitalism and the history of US and other imperial powers, to talk about sort of like what social and economic forces these agencies serve. We've talked a little bit about the sorting function, and Harsha touched on this a little bit in terms of the sort of coercion and labor power angle, but I want us to get into it a little bit more, because when I think what is important to think through is like what shifts in political analysis when we stop talking about reforming excessive enforcement by an allegedly uniquely cruel three-letter agency, and instead orient ourselves toward abolition as a framework for understanding and dismantling the border enforcement apparatus as a whole.
I can jump in, I guess, but I mean, Beatrice, I don't know. I think I'm still just like taking in everything that you shared. It's just so, it's so remarkable. Just before getting to your question, like I think one of the greatest challenges we've had in the immigrant justice movement compared to previous moments in the movement where we've been able to push the bounds, thinking about the Obama era and not wanting more deportations, or, you know, the work that Dreamers did, or even the first Trump administration. Like, so much of it was about like immigrants themselves coming out of the shadows, leading the fight themselves. And that has been the most debilitating thing about this last year, is trying to kind of figure out what to do with it's absolutely terrifying for communities. And I think what we've seen in so many cities, but just seen in Minneapolis in particular, this, 3,000 agents actually are not succeeding because of everything you just talked about. And that is like a level of solidarity practice that I can't even witnessing it is just so remarkable. So I just wanted to name that because I do think sometimes when we're talking about our work in organizing, so much of it lends itself to this idea of like personal material interest as opposed to actually this question of solidarity. And this is a testament to that's not what it has to be about. This is about us being in this together. And so I just really, really struck by it. I think in terms of immigration policing, I feel like Harsha laid out so much of what is actually like the role of immigration policing, which is essentially state control, social control, and into sort of who's deserving and who is not. I mean, Minneapolis is just like a very, very classic example of anti-Black racism and particular attacks on Somali community, bogus fraud charges against the community as a strategy to sort of come after large categories of immigrants and beyond. And I think that's ultimately it. Like so much of immigration and customs enforcement, or previously Immigration and Naturalization Service, or Border Patrol, CBP, all these different entities, Department of quote unquote Homeland Security, right? Like the intention is to say immigration is about national security and public safety, which is a lie that's constantly told to us, which in fact, and what you named, Harsha, is like immigration is about labor first and foremost. There's absolutely no question that is like a big driving factor, and like US militarism, the political economy, sort of global economy generally are big factors. And of course it's about seeking refuge and family relationships, et cetera, right? And so I think the intention of these entities is to sort of like reinforce this idea that immigration is about public safety and national security. And frustratingly, like even on the left, even left media is constantly sort of like pushing this idea, right? Like I can't even tell you, and so many people we work with constantly, well, actually the majority of people don't have criminal convictions. The majority of people have not, had any interaction. They actually have every right to be here without any sort of understanding of the underlying systems that deem people, quote unquote criminal and beyond. And so I think that that to me is like it's a significant moment today with the sort of shift that Tom Homan is talking about. And I mean, Tom Homan, just to say, is like, he was like elevated under the Obama administration, really, really central figure. I emailed him whenever we would have reports to say, close this detention center. And here is all the details about why this place is so incredibly awful. And he would be the person, one of the people that would email and then would respond. And he was like, it was very normalized. This isn't like, I think, again, there's just this intention constantly to be like, oh, look at these new agents that don't have training, or these people who came in under Trump and who are like emboldened by all this. No, they have been career officials. This is baked into the system. It's baked into how these agencies operate completely. And I do think that this like distinction about like Republicans versus Democrats in the US context is something that's worth naming as we understand these systems. So I think for Republicans, so much of it is about performance and spectacle and sort of like making people feel the fear of ICE coming after them. And so, during the Bush era, you saw, and Trump era, like you've seen a lot of mass raids, mass worksite raids, where it completely disrupts like whole communities, hundreds of people detained at like one single time, kids being put into foster care, like people getting charges, like it's so disruptive, and it's just disruptive to both the communities and also these, these places that people work. And at the same time, doing that sort of work behind the scenes in the criminal legal system. I think for, The Democrats, like a lot of it is about this sort of like efficiency and being sort of out of the public eye. And so what the Obama administration did with Tom Homan at the helm, along with many others, was to more closely tie the criminal legal system with the immigration system. And that's actually what brought deportations up. It's that more digitizing of the system. So having, fingerprint programs, having more and more ICE police collaborations. There was so much about the way Obama approached this that lent itself to having the highest levels of deportations we had ever seen, which will likely be surpassed. But that was the last time we had seen those high level of deportations. And it was because of this merger of the criminal legal system and immigration system that Tom Homan is now promoting as their strategy. This is Obama, like classic Obama era strategy. And what was so difficult about that time in particular is that so much of the narrative was good immigrant versus bad immigrant. And that, felons not families, et cetera, that very much, when you look at that time, there was an intention to pass comprehensive immigration reform. And there was a bill that passed in the Senate, which happened in 2013. And the only way it passed, it was a terrible bill for so many reasons. Some pathway to citizenship over many, many, many years with a lot more criminalization, a lot more border enforcement. And then they added this surge of $46 billion for border enforcement, this border surge amendment. And that's how it passed. Like the Democrats, no matter how disturbing the bill is, like as long as citizenship was on the table, they're like, we'll do all the border surge that we want to do. And so I think that to me is like a precursor to the bill that happened last summer. Like, even though the Democrats didn't support it, their years and years of supporting that sort of got us to this point. And so I think now we're seeing, like, already there's so many more jail agreements, so many more like law enforcement agreements. That's what Tom Homan was doing day one. I mean, he came to the Sheriff's Association meeting in February of 2025 and was like, I am lowering standards for jails to be used for ICE detention. And, we're here to work with whoever, as long as you're fine with using this jail, we're fine with using this jail. And so all of that has been built up. And now Tom Homan's saying, oh, look at me, I'm doing this thing that's like much more reasonable. And a lot of folks, liberals and people on the left included, are constantly being like, oh, they don't have criminal convictions, they aren't deserving of this. But what about all the other folks? And again, all these other folks that are caught up in this system because the US has one of the largest criminal legal systems in the whole entire world and a huge and massive apparatus. And so I think for me, the jail has been for many, many years the gateway to the deportation process. And which is why it's so essential that as we understand the role of ICE, we understand its relationship to all these other agencies as well.
Thank you both. This is just, it's such an honor to listen to both of you and to have been alongside in this conversation and before, and Beatrice, and to everyone, just everyone in the Twin Cities. Just my deepest respect and solidarity for everything that is going on and all of the ways in which people are, like, to me, that is how we abolish the border. Like, it is not simply an analytic frame. It is like the fundamental transformation of ourselves and our humanity to understand that our neighbors belong where they decide they belong, right? So when people are being ripped apart from their families, whether that's the pigs, whether that's ICE, who are also the pigs, whether it's child services, who are also the pigs, like all of that showing up for each other through care and solidarity, and our basic refusal to accept the fascist agenda of othering, right? Like just that refusal to believe that the person I live next to or live down the block from or who I buy my groceries from, the refusal to believe that they are something other than my neighbor, something other than a human. Like I refuse to buy into any narrative about them not belonging, or their so-called their illegality or their criminality or whatever fucking thing the state puts on it. Sorry, hey Market, I always forget whether or not we're allowed to swear, but I have forgotten. Is like that to me is how we abolish the border, right? It is refusing to accept a fascist agenda of dehumanization and fear, and particularly in an era where we are called through capitalism and colonialism to be isolated, atomized consumers who cannot see other humans, who are afraid of other humans, who believe that there is so much distance between us and other people. Abolishing the logic of the border to me is like fundamentally how we abolish the border, right? Like, because the border is expansive, like its tentacles will grow. Some Democrat may ride in with a promise to abolish ICE, but it just means they've started some new fucking agency or given money to some other agency, or never ending budgets, never ending agreements with other cops and other jails and literally other countries and other fascists and other dictators. And so the way to not be overwhelmed through that is to just refuse the entire logic, right? And to act in ways that refuses that entire logic, that refuse to succumb to anything but the abolition of all bordering regimes. And so to me, it connects to this question about, so then what is the logic of the border? The border is an extension of empire, of capitalism. And it is really, for me, at its core, bordering regimes are about control through immobilizing people, right? Like completely denying people's freedom to move. Whether that's people's freedom to move because they've been displaced, whether it's denying people's freedom to move because, their right to return has been denied, thinking here alongside Palestinian refugees, of course, who are the world's so-called largest refugee population because of the Zionist occupation. Thinking about how gentrification denies people's ability to move and live. And so, of course, indigenous peoples who are forced onto reserves and reservations, and controlled and corralled. And so all of this is an ordering system that is fundamentally about immobility. And because capitalism relies on immobility, right? Like that is literally how capitalism captures populations, is through creating immobile populations by dispossessing them from the land and displacing people, immobilizing them. So to me, that is the core function of the border. It is to immobilize people and capture them and contain them for racial capitalism and to maintain empire, which is a whole lot of words to just say like the border is part of the system of control that is global in scale. And to undo that is to undo the logic of the border. So to me, there is no abolishing the border that is somehow separate from abolishing cops, that is somehow separate from abolishing policing, that is somehow separate from abolishing empire, because the border is a function of those things, right? So you can't just miraculously separate out the border from completely dismantling and transforming the system that we live in. Because then you would just have an open border, which is not the same thing as the abolition of the border, right? It would just still mean massive chunks of the world would have inequality and extraction. So that's why for me, it is impossible to think about the border from a purely domestic lens. Like it is so connected to internationalism and why people are displaced and how people are displaced. And then the way that we counteract that can look differently based on where we are. But having an orientation to abolishing the border in its expansive scale, while organizing and acting to defend our neighbors, to defend our communities, to basically live the politics of no one should be deported, no one is disposable, no one should be detained, no one should be contained. Everyone has the basic right and freedom to live with dignity where they have chosen to make their home, and to be able to live in a good way, to be able to afford their homes, right? Like to me, immigration is also fundamentally a class struggle. It is not just about ensuring that immigrants aren't detained or deported. It's also about ensuring that migrants are not doing the most cheapened labor under racial capitalism, right? That they have labor protections, have the right to unionize, which is precisely what the border does, right? Every time in the United States when there's a union drive, but really all around the world, the first threat on workers is to call immigration, right? In like some of the most heinous workplaces, and that's not a coincidence. And so to me, abolishing the border and thinking beyond ICE means thinking in these ways and then acting in these magnificently beautiful, courageous ways that you have outlined and that we're seeing unfold in the United States and also around the world, right? Like I'm thinking here about all of the civic missions that are on the seas, right? Like when the Freedom Flotilla was sailing in the central Mediterranean, and literally had fleets of boats of also solidarity missions who have consistently literally done rescues in the waters of the Mediterranean, which is the world's deadliest border on the planet, where people are literally drowning and dying every single day, and when people are doing life-saving work by rescuing people. And the ways in which the Freedom Flotilla last year built solidarity and asserted the freedom of movement on the seas and the waters as a space of contestation and as a space of solidarity and resistance, right? Like all of these ways in which people are moving. To me, one of the most beautiful things, it's cheesy as fuck, but like, to me, when we think about social movements, I'm like, inherent in the word movement is moving. Like, how do we move with one another, right? How do we move in ways where we become courageous, not because we're somehow individually courageous people, but we become more courageous by actually doing things alongside other people, right? So to me, the way we abolish the border is thinking about it expansively, but most importantly, acting in ways that abolishes the border in our own context.
Thank you both so much for that. I feel like in particular, what we're seeing right now with the drawdown announcement for the Twin Cities is that they're shifting back into that kind of logic of this is about sorting between criminalized migrants and good migrants, bad. And, it's that kind of framework. And I think that that's being reforegrounded right now because they are losing here. They're like, we have to fall back on these tactics that are so tried and true because we are really losing. And we are really up against something that we were unprepared for and that we do not have the knowledge, capacity, skills to grapple with. And I think that that's what's been so fascinating about today's announcement and in the context of what's been going on in Minneapolis is that I think one of the struggles that we're going to have here moving forward is going to be around political education, sort of going through some of these principles of abolition with regard to the drawdown announcement, because there will be people who will be swayed by the good migrant, bad migrant framing that is being foregrounded right now. I mean, this is what Governor Walz was asking for. Don't take people in broad daylight, get the criminalized migrants at night in the middle of the night go into their homes with a no-knock warrant, right? Like these are the kinds of things that the sort of liberal quiet framing, as you were laying out, the democratic framing, Silke, that you laid out, like this is that kind of quiet preference for enforcement. And so I think this is being floated as a tactic because the spectacle has failed here. They've encountered resistance they were unprepared for, which I hope will inspire people to, patiently educate their neighbors through this transition and in quote unquote Operation Metro Surge to a more mundane immigration policing arrangement. Because I think it's a moment to continue these tactics in the context of some of our old arguments that we've always been up against, right? And so one of the things that I want to bring in just briefly here is that, we're seeing renewed calls to abolish ICE, and this is like vital and politically energizing, and the demand absolutely cannot stop at the abolition of a single agency in a single country. This in so many ways puts us at risk of a very symbolic victory that leaves the deeper architecture of state violence and border capitalism intact, as you're saying, Harsha. So I'd love for us just to briefly discuss, what we mean when we say abolish ICE, what abolish ICE must also implicate, what else has to go if we take abolition seriously. And I just sort of want to talk about that and address that sort of demand briefly for a second, because I think it's important in the context of them sort of recognizing their failure and shifting tactics in response, to just sort of address the capacities that these demands hold, right? Because it's very easy to sort of assume that everyone is on the same page, because everyone all has the same yard sign, right? But the sort of language games of demand, I think, are really important in terms of like a line struggle that needs to happen.
Sure, Silky's suggested I go first. I'll be brief. And of course, here I defer to both of you because I'm in a different geographical space. Some of the first stuff around Abolish ICE that I recall was actually at that time a gathering that included comrades from the US in 2004. And so we had a convening that was like abolish the border, abolish ICE, abolish CBSA, which is the Canada Border Services Agency. And they both started around the same time. So to me, they were always connected, right? It was like abolish ICE, abolish CBSA, abolish the border. And this is going back 21 years now. So for me, I think it's incredibly important that abolish ICE is a framework because, again, it is a shift in the US context where, and Silky, you and I've talked about this, like the move from immigrant rights movement to an abolitionist politics is newer in the US, perhaps compared to other places, because of the nonprofit industrial complex and the way in which the immigrant rights movement has imagined itself is actually quite different in the US than a lot of other places, compared to even like Europe and Canada and elsewhere. And so it's so revitalizing to see abolish ICE as a framework because of the good immigrant, bad immigrant stuff that has been so seeped into the rights type frameworks. And to have something that is so explicitly abolitionist is so incredibly incredible and refreshing. But absolutely, for me, it's like abolish ICE emerged from an abolition of the border type politics and dismantle the border type politics, especially in the post 9/11 climate, where the border was understood as a key function of global empire, right? Like in the post 9/11 climate. And so I think that everything that we're talking about, right, is that it's not just about one agency, because that agency could be renamed, its budget could be reshuffled, its mandate could be moved over. It is about understanding how border enforcement and bordering regimes as a whole work. And so daylighting all of those connections, there are over 10,000 agencies in the United States that have jurisdiction over migrants. 10,000. ICE is one of 10,000. They all have jurisdiction to varying degrees, right? So that's something to keep in mind, that it's about a bordering regime and it's about a system of control, and it is connected to so many other agencies. And that's why we are talking about fundamental transformation. So to me, abolish ICE very much sits within an abolish the border framework, which is what this is called. This event is so aptly named.
I do like the last chapter of my book is called Beyond Abolish ICE, so clearly I have feelings about. I mean, I think the thing, two things I'll say. One is in 2018, there was like a big push for abolish ICE, it was a blip, but it was a moment. And I think, and it was because there was family separations happening at the border. Parents were coming with their children and they were being separated from each other. And everyone was like, oh, ICE. Like it mostly had nothing to do with ICE. Like that's one thing. It's like, it was Border Patrol agents arresting people, putting them in US Marshals jails, and US attorneys were prosecuting them. And then once they went through that process, they could kids were being sent to Office of Refugee Resettlement facilities that were under the Health and Human Services Department. There's all just what everything Harsha was saying. There was so many other entities involved. Yes, ICE is one component, and then, if people were prosecuted for reentry, they could end up in Bureau of Prisons facilities. So it was just this whole mess of agencies that actually had very little to do with ICE. And to me, it was like, okay, there's something that's being missed here, but like ICE had become this thing. So I think that's one thing I'll say. And then the other thing I'll say, which is again, like the big argument of my book, which is like this system exists. What we know of ICE today, what we know of immigration detention today exists because of the prison industrial complex and the growth of mass incarceration in the US and the long history of warehousing Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, working class communities in the US. And it grew in response to that. Every single war on drugs in particular is when you start to see mandatory detention baked into law, when you start to see more and more people being funneled into the system, where you start to see more and more people not being able to, get out of pretrial detention, which is what essentially immigration detention is. And so I think ultimately everything that we've seen is an extension of the prison system. Every single facility that ICE uses, there's 5 that ICE owns and operates. Every single other one is either a current or former jail or, recycled prison that's been used before by, the state of Louisiana. There was a lot of criminal justice reforms and there was all these empty beds. And in the first Trump administration, they swooped in and said, okay, we're going to have 6,000 more beds for immigration detention here now. So all of it is really, really interconnected. We've talked at length about law enforcement and those relationships. So to me, there is no abolishing ICE without really deeply looking at, local state police, state troopers. I mean, so many different entities involved in this. And then looking at our sheriffs and county jails, again, a central entity in the deportation machine. I'll just leave it there.
No, that was so perfect. And I feel like it's, so crucial to sit with the scale and interconnectedness of especially the sort of warehousing regime and the various agencies that fuel it. And I think that's something that for a lot of people, when they're sort of entering into an abolitionist framework for the first time, can be incredibly radicalizing to realize that it's a kind of whack-a-mole, where you might take down one facility, but if they build it, they will fill it, or if it still stands, they will shift it to different agency jurisdiction and they will fill it, right? And it's just such an important sort of, I think, aspect that also sort of connects this back into regimes of disability warehousing, which for a long time in the United States were massive, enormous multi-jurisdictional structures in the kind of medico-legal system in the US. And many of those facilities were closed, right? This is a eminently doable demand to look towards the horizon of abolition that is not merely one single apparatus of the enforcement regime, right? This is core to all struggles, because all struggles also touch on migration, on free movement, and on incarceration. And I think, we've seen recent struggles against immigration policing take on, I think, really important formulations that are sort of teaching people who are doing this work how this works in real time, right? It's been very radicalizing for people here in Minneapolis to be accompanying people to hearings, for example, trying to interrupt ICE detention going on in and around immigration hearings, and then only to be thwarted by Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, right? There was, I think, a belief early on that maybe local law enforcement would sort of step up to protect people, that maybe the Minnesota National Guard would protect people. There was an important sort of photo op they did where the Minnesota National Guard handed out donuts to protesters at Whipple. And that sort of belief was very immediately disabused, right, from a lot of people. And so we've seen people learning in real time the actual commitments of abolition through participation in rapid response networks. We've seen this in infrastructures of community defense, of mutual aid. All of these have also been incredibly effective at interrupting detention through various means. Sometimes we're buying time for someone to get away. Sometimes we're overwhelming agents into leaving. Sometimes it's a relentless wearing of the agents down until they're exhausted as we are, right? Sometimes we're seeing people directly interrupting arrests. There's a lot of really bold bravery and a lot of really ordinary bravery that's going on that's been really about sort of applying all these tactics again to stop as many people as possible from being passed through this regime of warehousing. And I think what is important about all these techniques and all these tactics in Minneapolis that have been so effective is that they demonstrate that the state's power is contingent, and that what looks like overwhelming power and control in a massive, huge international system of incarceration can actually be sort of steadily and reliably actually undermined through coordinated, decentralized, collective, and material forms of support. And when federal agents arrived in the Twin Cities as an occupying force, folks did not waste time relying on appeals to legality and procedure here. They relied instead on practices that repair the disrupted social, familial, medical, and care networks, that redistributed resources, that circulated and acquired information, and that otherwise sort of maintained collective well-being under these conditions of chronic stress and surveillance. And as my friend Rasha Abdulhadi says, like, we must all do what we can to throw sand in the gears of genocide. And they're speaking to Palestinian liberation in that moment. But I think that the lesson applies here too. So I'd love to just end us today by talking about what abolition demands of us, not just as organizers, but as neighbors, as friends, as strangers, taking responsibility for each other. What kind of durable cross-movement and internationalist infrastructure is necessary to withstand repeated waves of repression, to help teach people newer to the movement about some of these old frameworks and rhetorics that we're always up against? How do we cultivate political confidence in the possibility of a world without borders so that people can really not just theoretically understand, but really, like, in a deep embodied way, understand this framework, Harsha, that you laid out earlier, that these are not natural, not necessary, and not permanent. So I think, I just want to sort of end us by talking about what lessons these practices of care offers for imagining abolition as a kind of active, material, and collaborative project of collectively weakening the border regime in both an immediate and a long-term way simultaneously.
Do you want to go first, Arsha? Or okay, I can go ahead quickly. Okay. I'm struggling to know exactly how to answer this question, but I think in terms of, the thing that has been really important to me in my process of, kind of calling myself an abolitionist back in, 2003, when I went to the Critical Resistance Conference in New Orleans. I was like, I'm an abolitionist, to like understanding what abolition really means and what the practice of it is so much about having, like, thinking about it as like a lens and a guide. And so that looks like not defaulting to the sort of like easy arguments. And I think that's like one thing and again, I'm saying this a lot because I am seeing, I will not name names, but like a lot of left media that is constantly saying things that are leaning into innocence frameworks and really pushing this idea that it is acceptable that some people should be targeted by ICE. And I think so much of our work right now, because there's been such an incredible moral panic and backlash and crime panic over the last couple of years, like, is actually going back to those lessons of 2020 and what we learned in Minneapolis and what we learned in those moments. I think there's that was the moment when we, as immigrant justice activists, were actually able to make huge strides, because there was this broader reckoning with policing and broader reckoning with mass incarceration, that we were able to say, look, what you're doing here doesn't make sense either. And I think now we're in this really tough spot where actually, like, so much is focused on ICE. I'm really, like, it's amazing to see all this effort around ICE out, but again, if we're just doing it in the context of accepting those systems of control of prisons and policing and the broader border regime, like, then we're really not doing the work. And so I think that's a really, really central component of this. Like, narrative is so key. And then the other thing I'll just say and end on, because I know we're almost out of time, is, you know, I really do think, like you were mentioning this point, Beatrice, about the sort of whack-a-mole. And I think there is this sort of tendency to feel like, well, what's the point of doing this? Because they're just gonna do it somewhere else. And how do we have to have different terrains of struggle, and we all have different roles. And I think what's been so remarkable in Minneapolis and all these other places where people are, you know, they're like really acutely like, this is my neighborhood, this is what's happening, this is what I can do. That is a role that you can play. But there's also other roles to play. You know, there are local efforts. You know, just now we saw in Kansas City, they're stopping one of the warehouses. There's been local efforts across the country to say, no, actually, we don't want these new massive warehouses. We don't want to have this, you know, ICE police collaboration. And you can do that at the county level or the city level. New Mexico just passed the Immigrant Safety Act, where they ended those sort of ICE collaborations, and they can't go into new detention contracts with public entities. Really, really great. We have to throw wrenches in this. And even now with this budget fight, you know, there is, which is happening currently in Congress around DHS funding, you know, there, like 1,000 organizations came out calling for cuts in funding, which is hugely significant. Like, if we can draw down some of that money, then that actually prevents that sort of game of whack-a-mole. And that's what we saw over time in our fights in the previous Trump administration and early Biden. We were actually able to shrink the detention system by doing it on both fronts. And I think right now, you know, Bernie Sanders put forward an amendment to say, like, revoke some of this reconciliation money and have it go to Medicare, like some of that money that was taken away. Like, that's great. Like, we need to do that work to say, this money, it's not a done deal. It doesn't have to be a done deal. And so for me, that abolitionist practice is about like all those sort of layers of work and figuring out where you're at in it. What's the thing that you're able to offer? And I know it can feel so hard with the levers of power we have right now, but, you know, calling your member of Congress and saying, no, we don't want this funding, more funding for ICE and CBP. We want to draw some of this down, actually has material impacts on people in communities across the country. And so to me, abolition is about really clearly, like, you know, that narrative work, that like really commitment to everyone, and also that strategy of like, how do we chip away as much as we possibly can?
Thanks, Silky. And also, because we're going to wrap soon, I just also want to, just thank you for all the work you've been doing for 20 years. It doesn't go unnoticed. I forgot the question. Yes, sorry. The abolitionist practice. I would say for me, you know, I think it's and obviously not to get into this side tangent, but for me, it's abolition. It's also internationalism. It's also anti-imperialism. Like, for me, some would say they're the same thing, but I do want to name, especially that they're connected, but sometimes they're separate things. And that is so important because, again, the border is literally everywhere. So we cannot only think about dismantling the bordering regime or policing regimes within the territory of the so-called United States when its empire is literally killing people everywhere. And as we speak. So to me, those are deeply connected ways of dismantling the border, which is to say that, you know, if you are organizing for climate justice, if you are organizing to end the occupation of Palestine, and on and on and on, right? Like all of those are part of migrant justice organizing, right? That is actually how, for me, migrant justice organizing has looked like on the ground for 20 plus years in the context where I'm in, which is to refuse to silo immigrant rights as an issue that is about immigrants. It is to fundamentally see these as connected, and that actually does advance migrant justice, right? Because when people are not displaced from their homelands, they're not forced to migrate under precarious conditions against their will. So for me, it is quite expansive. And I would just echo what we have been talking about, that another part of that is, in addition to internationalism, is this piece that literally no one is illegal. Like the settler state is illegal, and we cannot allow it to arbitrate who has the right to live and under what conditions based on the accident of birth. Like that is the framework for me. And that's how we organize, right? Like we literally organize and support and in defense of everybody. Which is not contingent on their innocence or their likability, which comes up a lot, right? When you're organizing to support folks who've done things that you fundamentally believe are heinous or you don't like, but you still defend their right to not be deported. And I think that will come up a lot as deportations ramp up, and as the kind of figure of the most undesirable migrant becomes the kind of poster child to justify such fascist violence. Kind of tangibly on the ground, I may be forgetting things, so I'm sure someone will ping me and tell me that I forgot things, but we've had in our organizing context, and what I've learned from others, in case this is a useful offering, around how to actually think about making the border obsolete in real time, right? Because as we're saying, it can feel overwhelming, or it can feel like whack-a-mole, and then you kind of give up on all of it. And so we've had a several-pronged approach. One is organizing on all fronts, as Silky was talking about, to stop all detentions, right? So whether that looks like stopping projects before they're built, getting them emptied out, not allowing for, new forms of detention. Family detention really is the big one around the world right now, is framing it as family detention. So stopping detentions anywhere they happen, which can often look like new infrastructure or jails. Squashing all deportation. So whether that looks like direct action in the moment to defend your neighbors, or whittling away at policies that allow for greater categories of people who are deportable. Because that is also happening around the world, right? Where increasingly more and more people are losing their status, like whether it's their temporary status, their permanent residency status, their asylum status. So working at all levels to ensure that no one is being deported. The other thing is being really cautious around alternatives to detention. This is a big deal in Canada. It's a big deal in the US. It's a big deal around the world, right? Where more and more people are forced to incarcerate their bodies, GPS monitors, tracking, etc. So really not going down that rabbit hole. So being mindful about alternatives to detention that are reformist. Ending all policing agreements. So looking at the ways in which immigration, as we've been talking about, is embedded in so many agencies. Obviously law enforcement is an obvious one, but where I live and other countries where it's much less about the private structure, it's much more the public infrastructure. Like we are seeing increasingly hospitals and schools, workplaces making agreements to turn over information to border services agencies, right? So squashing all of those kinds of agreements. Transit, right? Like transit cops can turn you over in Vancouver, where I live, to border services agencies. So chipping away at the municipal infrastructure that allows for collaboration with immigration. The other one is sanctuary cities, which looks different in different places, but really working at the local level to ensure that all services are accessible to all people, which does not just include migrants. It literally means all people, right? Like regardless of their so-called criminal record status, regardless of their so-called mental health status, if they're sex workers, if they use substances, whether they're unhoused, whatever, like a genuine sanctuary city that is accessible to all residents of the city. The other piece is like abolishing the massive security infrastructure that really was built up after 9/11, but is getting kicked up into gear, particularly with the genocide in Gaza, with security discourse and so-called terrorism and anti-terrorism discourse. So keeping an eye on and really fighting back against all the security and terror listings that we're seeing crop up. Like this administration has banned mostly Palestinian resistance organizations just in the past year, right? And that is part of the migrant justice fight, is to refuse the war on terror framework and its linkages to the war on migrants. And the other two pieces really quickly is, again, I mentioned this earlier, but all fights for labor and social protections are migrant justice fights that make the border obsolete. Because when we fight for migrants to be able to be on the work floor and on the factory floor and working with the same conditions that so-called citizens are, that makes the border obsolete, right? When they're not getting paid differently, or their working conditions are not structured and segmented differently. And then the last one, and I started off with this, but just to state the obvious, like, to make the border obsolete is to actually fight for global justice and for, an end to imperialism and racial capitalism, because these are intricately connected. There is no fight that isn't connected to not making the border obsolete. That was a lot.
No, it was wonderful, a wonderful offering. And I wish we could just go on for hours, but it's late. And as we close, I just want to leave us with the reminder that, what we've been talking about, the violence of border regimes, it's not accidental, it's not inevitable, it's produced, it's organized, it's maintained, and so it can be dismantled. And abolition is a practice of care and solidarity and shared defense and creativity. It's an insistence on a mutual political horizon with no more cages, walls, or borders. And I think we have to remember that building another world begins here in our neighborhoods, in our organizing, in our relationships across borders, and in our commitments to one another. These are systems built for us, and it is our duty to dismantle them. So let's leave here tonight by insisting that care and solidarity is where true power lies, as Minneapolis has really shown us. And that collective action is our strongest weapon against a world that is designed to make us fearful, isolated, and compliant. And I just want to deeply also thank Silky and Harsha from the bottom of my heart for bringing decades of insight, organizing, and just uncompromising vision, clarity to this conversation. I'm so inspired by our discussion, and your work shows us what abolition looks like in thought and practice. And please read their books. Please read their books. They're fantastic. And thank you to Haymarket Books and all of the workers behind the scenes for making spaces like this possible. And to everyone watching at home, thank you for being present, for listening, for imagining a world beyond borders with us tonight. Keep fighting, keep caring for each other, and to paraphrase Ruthie Gilmore, keep struggling together because we have no alternative. As the late Cleve Bentley used to say, be well and stay dangerous. Stay alive another week, everyone, and good night.
Okay. We're going to answer some questions now. How is that for everyone? How is that for everyone? Now, I want to get something out of the way, and then we're going to take serious questions. Someone's already sent in a super chat with a question, so that one will be first. Not that one. That was not the one I meant to. That was not the one I meant to cite. Hang on. I didn't mean to make fun of you. I didn't mean to use the voice on you. I was trying to find one earlier. Here are the ones I was trying to find. They were the ones that were saying, "Oh wait, I'm almost there. Oh wait. They have 190 people watching their channel. We have 432. LOL." And the reason I highlight that is there were several questions in the chat. How many people are even watching this? How many people are even watching this? No one's even watching this. This doesn't matter. You absolute fucking retards. They're winning and you're losing massively. Do you think that YouTube views are the things that dictate that they're winning? No. What dictates that they're winning is they're organizing in the streets every fucking day, getting over 100,000 people into those fucking signal groups in one fucking city. You think the YouTube views are what matters? Bro, this is just an archive of their content. The only reason you're even seeing this is I know where to look for their content. What matters is what they do in the real world. What matters is not social media views. It's not likes and shares on Twitter. It's not how many things did we get to go viral this week on the fucking internet. It's what are they doing in the real world today. And in the real world today, whether you like these people or not, whether they had 100 views or 1,000 views or 1 million views, it really doesn't fucking matter. They are winning And our side is losing colossally. And the reason that our side is losing colossally is most people who claim to be against the left don't even understand what they're talking about. W's in the chat for Doug. Thanks so much for gifting a channel membership. Hang on, I'm going to call. There we go. You didn't need to hear that in the screen. Hey guys, let's okay, now that I've yelled, let's start this off on a more positive note. Who learned something from watching that stream with me today? Whether or not you've been around the channel for months or years, whether or not you just showed up, once in the chat if you learned something by watching that presentation with me today. Twos in the chat if you knew all that already and you didn't learn a damn thing. Ones in the chat if you learned something today. Twos in the chat if you knew all that already and nothing was new. That's an awful lot of ones. I'm seeing an awful lot of ones. I'm seeing an awful lot of ones come through. And the twos are the ones who've been paying attention to what I've been saying. The twos are the ones who've been around for a little while. And even some of the people who've been around for a little while still learn something. You know, they said a lot of the quiet part out loud in that presentation. We got a lot of great clips from that presentation. And I would just like to say, listen, guys, if you learn something today, if you appreciate that I'm showing you guys content on the internet that no one else is showing you, that I'm taking the time to answer your questions and break it all down, that I'm taking the time to really pick apart this language and make sure you guys understand what you are watching and understand what you're hearing, I want you to consider gifting a channel membership, just one. Everyone can afford $5 okay? Normally, spy streams like we did today are supporter exclusive. That means you have to be a supporter of mine on one platform, whether that be Substack or Locals or Patreon or Twitter subscriber or a YouTube channel member. And if we gift out YouTube channel memberships and Rumble, you guys can do this too, or you guys can gift memberships on my Substack as well if you prefer to do it there, wherever you want to do it. If you guys gift out channel memberships, we will get more people into spy streams when we do them in the future. And there are a lot of organizing calls right now. There's going to be a lot of spy streams coming up. So if you appreciate what I do and I taught you something today, please feel free to gift us. Just do a single channel membership. That's like $5. Everyone can afford that. You will give someone else a channel membership. You will make someone else's day. If you can gift more than one channel membership, that's awesome. Give 5, 10, whatever you want. But, you know, I mean, come on. Come on, guys. We got W's in the chat for Anthony. We got W's in the chat for Tracy. Anthony and Tracy. We got Jay Carroll here with a gifted channel membership. Guys, if 100 of you gifted one single channel membership, that'd be 100 new people on the channel, and that's awesome. We got Goro over there gifting 5 channel memberships over on Rumble. You guys are making me do math already? Holy shit. Thank you so much, Goro. W's in the chat for all of these champions that are gifting channel memberships out. We got Wolf gifting a channel membership. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Want to make sure I didn't miss anyone. We got Ronnie gifting a channel membership. That's a couple more. I have to say that because I have to keep track in my head because I have to do math to update our progress goal. I really appreciate it, guys. You guys are awesome. If you guys, oh, we got Doug in there with a channel member. Cynthia in with the 20. Holy shit, Cynthia. Massive W's for Cynthia and for Doug and for A97807 who gifted 5 channel memberships. That's 26 more. Oh my God, you guys are definitely making me do math now. 45, 55, 65. 165 new channel members so far. That is awesome. Holy shit. We got one from Conservatism for Life. We got one from Charles. Thank you, guys. We got one from Marina. Thank you, Mariana. However we pronounce that today. Thank you all for the gifted channel memberships. W's in the chat to everyone who's sending in these gifts. You guys are awesome. I'm 100% independently funded, guys. I cannot do this if people don't support my work. So I very much appreciate everyone who's gifting in some channel memberships. You guys are awesome. All right. Let me go back. We did have a question earlier that came in the form of a super chat, and I'm willing to answer other questions as well. But of course, I'm going to prioritize questions in the form of a super chat because, you know, they paid me money and you guys didn't. So it's the way it goes. So are they aiming for one race and one culture? I know this might sound odd. Race as in skin color is not something the left talks about. So one of the things you guys will learn about me if you're new is if I'm saying the left believes X or the left believes Y, it's not because I'm forming an opinion. It's because I have literally heard them say it on video. So I'm repeating back to you what I've heard the left say on video or what I've heard them say when I was undercover at one of their events or something like that. The left does not really talk about skin color all that much. The only time they're talking about skin color is when they're talking about oppression based on class, because they believe everyone that is not white is like fundamentally part of the proletariat. But then there are also white people who are also part of the proletariat. But then there are also white people who own property, and so they're not part of the proletariat. But then there are non-white people who own property, and they're also not part of the proletariat because they have ascended to whiteness. So when they're talking about whiteness, they're talking about, or race in general, they're talking about who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed. They're not talking about skin color. So it's difficult to answer this question, do they want one race? I've never heard them express that overtly, but I don't think they would be opposed to it because it's not a factor that it's not something that factors into their decision making at all. They certainly want one world government. They believe that, you saw it in the presentation today. The whole thing was about abolishing capitalism or abolishing borders, which is the same thing as capitalism. So they don't believe borders should exist. So they don't want any countries to exist. They don't want any nationalism. So they do want a one world government sort of thing. Not the same thing as the WEF. WEF is a separate thing, but I have not heard them talk about race in particularly that way. So I do appreciate the question. Thank you so much for that. Just scrolling down, seeing what else other questions you guys have. Let me take this one. Great stream. If one of their goals is to destabilize any and all institutions, what can we do in our day-to-day lives to combat them? The very first thing that everyone can do, and you're not going to like this answer, but I'm going to tell you the answer. The very first thing that everyone here can do is learn as much as you can about the left. And this is particularly true for people who've been watching me for 6 months or less. And the reason I say 6 months is we've been doing a lot of ICE coverage lately, so that my content hasn't been expansive in the last several months as it was previously. Usually we focus on a wide variety of leftist content. We've just been doing a lot of anti-ICE stuff lately because that's what's kind of the thing to cover. But if you haven't been watching my content for 6 months, you need to just you are a student, okay? You need to unlearn everything that you think you know, because most of what has been taught to you by our right-wing media is just wrong. It's wrong, or it's an outdated belief, or it's based on the philosophy that's 200 years old. But the ideology of the left has evolved and expanded and mutated significantly since those papers were written. So it's you can't go back and read Marx and Engels and say this is what the left believes today. What the left believes today may have been built somewhat off of Marx and Engels and all the other dead philosophers, I call them, but it's not the same thing. It's mutated, it's expanded, they've evolved. There are other thinkers who have iterated on that work, and their ideology has only become more leftist and more dystopian. So the very, very, very first thing that no, we don't lie. And you like to fucking lie, and I don't fucking like it. Karlyn will never give any details for action. No, that's not true. That's not true. The details for action are you have to shut the fuck up and learn before you go and do anything. You know why you have to shut the fuck up and learn before you go do anything? And you like to do stuff like this, and you're about to get put in a 5-minute timeout so that you cannot speak again on my channel, because this is not the first time I've seen you do. Karlyn isn't going to tell us what to do except for watch her content. Literally go fuck yourself. If you don't know enough to sit the fuck down, shut the fuck up, and learn about your enemy, you are not smart enough to be on my channel. Do you fucking understand? When you become fluent in the language of the left, you will know what to do. But do you know why you losers keep fucking losing? Do you know why Tom Homan is losing colossally in Minnesota? Do you know why the entire Trump administration is losing colossally in Minnesota? Because they don't know what the fuck they're doing. They don't know who their enemy is. They don't know what the goal is. They don't know what the language is. They have no fucking clue. And neither do you if you say, Karlyn's not going to give us any details except watch her content. You are not smart enough to be on my channel, motherfucker. Do you understand? You're getting put in a timeout now because I'm so sick of this shit from you. And if you ever come back and do it again, permanent ban from the channel. I've given you enough fucking warnings. That is what happens, guys, when you try to be a disruptive conservative prick in my chat, just so you know. Just so you know. Hey, W's to Cynthia, 5 channel memberships, 10 channel memberships. Cynthia loves it when I yell at people. 5 more gifted channel memberships. That is 15 gifted channel memberships. Holy shit, another 5. That's 20 gifted channel memberships from Cynthia just because I started yelling. How rad. How rad is that? So, to go back to answer the question more nicely before I was rudely interrupted by the conservative asshole that was whining his fucking feelings in my chat over being told he needs to shut the fuck up and learn what's going on before he ever dares speak in my chat again. If you do not understand your enemy, there is no tactic that you can implement that will be effective. The reason that Trump is getting his ass kicked by the far left up and down the playing field, the reason that Tom Homan should be hanging his head in fucking shame is because they do not understand the enemy that they're fighting. So, Cynthia, W's, Cynthia, thank you. Cynthia is such a capitalist goddess. What a legend, man. The reason that they are failing so colossally to address any of the things related to leftist violence is they have not taken the time to understand the enemy that they're fighting. So, therefore, until you sit your ass down and actually learn what you're dealing with, there's no tactic I can give you. I have seen this happen over and over and over again. I've been doing this a long fucking time. I have seen conservatives celebrate that we get elected to school board seats. And then guess what happens? They end up voting in favor of leftist policies because they didn't bother to understand the enemy they were fighting. I've seen conservatives say, we banned critical race theory in schools. Guess what? None of the anti-CRT bills actually banned the teaching of critical race theory. Critical race theory was still taught in every single state that had an anti-CRT bill. You want to know why? Conservatives didn't understand the problem that they were attempting to solve, and the bills didn't actually ban the teaching of critical race theory. It banned discrimination against white people. If you understand anything about the left at all, you know that whiteness is not about skin color, it's about capitalism. So all of the same ideas that were taught before the anti-CRT bills were taught after the anti-CRT bills. But conservatives went around high-fiving going, we banned CRT. Every single person who said they banned CRT was lying to you, by the way. You know those executive orders that Trump wrote banning the teaching of gender ideology in schools at the beginning of his administration? They haven't done shit. Do you know how many school teachers I have on video since Trump posted those executive orders that are overtly talking about we're going to teach whatever the fuck we want and you can't do anything about it? Do you know why Trump is just completely a fucking failure in terms of banning any of the gender shit in schools? Because he didn't understand the enemy that he was fighting. And I'm so fucking sick of hearing it from conservatives. You just think you know everything. You just think we don't know everything. You just tell us to learn on your content and we want things to do. The reason I don't give conservative retards things to do is that until they literally shut the fuck up, unlearn every retard thing they've ever been taught by their own media, until they do that and actually learn what the enemy is and what they're doing and what their language is and all this stuff, there is not shit that they can do that's going to stop the left. They're just going to keep doing, you know what conservatives are doing, guys? They're cleaning the house by taking a mess from one room and putting it in another fucking room. Has anyone ever done this? You sit down to it's like a Saturday, you're like, I'm going to clean up the house. What you end up doing is you take a mess from one room and you move the mess to another fucking room. Have you actually cleaned anything? No, you just moved the mess from one location to another, but you feel like you did something. That is exactly what conservatives are doing when it comes to the far left. They are making it look like they're doing something. They're high-fiving themselves and saying, we beat the left. Woke is dead. Woke is dead. Do you guys remember after Trump got elected and inaugurated, the entire right was like, we won. The left lost. The Democratic Party's over. Woke is dead. We won. There's no more of this DEI shit. How's that going, guys? How's that going? Because I can look at the fucking federal government and see DEI. I can look at every school district in America and see DEI. I can look at the videos we watch on the fucking internet where these people are literally calling to overthrow the government, taking over major American cities, defeating the Trump administration at absolutely every fucking step. The midterms are going to be a goddamn bloodbath. You understand this, right? The midterms are going to be a goddamn bloodbath. And the Democratic Party is going to win. Not that they've done anything to deserve to win, but Republicans have handled this entire last year and a half so fucking badly, they don't stand a chance at all. And guess what? The far left is controlling the narrative that is going to drive the entire fucking election cycle. Everything they did in Minneapolis worked. Everything they did, every single thing the Trump administration has done to fight the left in Minneapolis has failed colossally. The left won, the Trump administration lost. And what that means is that every single strategy they used in Minneapolis is now getting exported nationally. And so you think that this is the last of it because Tom Homan said, we won, guys. Bullshit. You're going to see this popping up in every major city in the country. It is only emboldened the left. You literally heard them say it on the presentation today. So, if you are unwilling to sit down, shut the fuck up, and learn about the enemy that you are fighting, there is nothing that you can do that will be effective. So if you want to keep spinning your wheels and keep moving the mess from one room into another room, you go right ahead. But I am not going to coddle those feelings on this channel. I've had it with this attitude on the right. It is fucking ridiculous. Anyway, we've gotten a lot of channel memberships during that rant. I don't know. Cynthia, I don't even know how many channel memberships you're up to at this point, girl. Let's see. 5, 10, 15, 20. We got Malcolm in with a W. We got, let's see. Let's do some of these super chats. Hang on. I'll go down and get all the super chats and all the channel memberships. Guys, do W's in the chat when the channel memberships come in. I really appreciate it. No longer afraid to say the quiet part out loud frequently and in great detail because they're winning. They've never been afraid to. Dorfus, you're relatively new. They have always said this out loud. It's always been this overt. And again, you're relatively new to my content and you're really learning a lot very quickly. And I see that and I want to acknowledge that. But you have to understand that just because you've started hearing it, it doesn't mean this is the first they've started to say it. I've literally been filming these people for years. And they've said the same thing for years. The problem is if you don't know where to look for the content, you don't see it. The problem is that your influencers have lied to you and have obfuscated it. I've been sending videos to conservative influencers that literally are exactly like the ones we watched today, literally for years. Every single one. I have sent videos to Glenn Beck. I've sent videos to the Daily Wire. I've sent videos to the Daily Caller. I've sent videos to the Washington Free League. I've sent videos to the general email address of the Blaze. I've sent videos to Steven Crowder. I've sent videos to literally every fucking influencer I could think of to try to get this information out for fucking like 4 fucking years now. The information has always been there. The media, the conservative influencers ignored it. They didn't listen. So the reason you're just finding out about this is because no one was listening when they were saying all this stuff for years and years and years and years. And we tried and we failed, but thankfully people are waking up now. And I'm glad you're here, Dorfus. Thank you for the super chat. We got Cynthia with all the channel memberships. Cynthia, the channel membership goddess. Anti-retard medication. Thank you, Malcolm. Appreciate that. I'm not sure if I already honored that one, Cynthia. Thank you so much. Mark in Portland, Travis, a.k.a. Captain America Shield at the ICE protest, was arrested by the feds for making threats against Trump. Oh, good. Good. That's exciting. Thanks for the update, Mark in Portland. I appreciate that. Cynthia in with the 20. Thank you. Thank you. Lao Tzu, there is no greater danger than underestimating your opponent. Yeah. Yeah. This is why, guys, this is why it's so incredibly dangerous for conservatives to say, the left is stupid. The left is mentally ill. The left are just paid protesters. Every single time the right calls the left paid protesters, they are dismissing their enemy. Every single time the right calls the left paid protesters or says they're stupid or lazy or they don't have jobs or they don't even know what they're protesting, which is all bullshit, Every single time the right does this, they allow the left to operate completely unopposed. That is why we're in the situation that we're in, guys. The right is allowing the left to operate completely unopposed. So the left can do whatever the fuck they want. The right just goes, they're paid protesters. They're funded by Soros. Look at all their signs. Well, they're all mentally ill. They're just all lazy. By the way, do they seem lazy to you? Because they seem highly organized to me. And then lazy people don't operate like this. Every single time conservatives do this, they dismiss the enemy, and the enemy just goes on keeping doing what they're doing with no opposition. And that is why I yell and scream at conservatives, because they need to learn to stop doing this shit. And if they don't, we are so fucked. If we don't wake up more people, like I'm talking like right fucking now, we are so fucked. If the conservative right still keeps perpetuating and hanging on to this fucking narrative, they're all paid protesters funded by Soros. You heard them say in the presentation how they're funded. They flat out said, we are non-hierarchical. There is no one funding source. We are decentralized. This is from mutual aid. They said it in the presentation. The left tells you how they're funded. No one fucking listens. Thanks, Cynthia. W's in the chat for Cynthia. 5 more. I've lost count of how many channel memberships we have at this point. Honestly, I should probably. God, we've gotten over 115 on this stream, so that's fucking rad. We got. I think that's W's in the chat for Mark Ducks. Appreciate that. Another W for Cynthia. That's awesome. I'm going to add 15 more, I think. I don't even know if the math is correct at this point, but that'll be like 208 or something like that for the whole day. You guys rock. Let's get some other super chats. Not sure if you saw this. Jake Lang's going to the NYC mayor. Oh! When is Jake Lang doing that? When is that little dream happening? Is that now? What day is he doing that? That'll be fun to watch. I hope someone goes and films him. Thanks so much, Prita. KOMO News just reported on my feed that they've allocated $2 million to help immigrants and banish ICE. So that's nice of them. Homan and Trump rolled over. This is just the beginning. Oh, yeah, it's going to be bad. March 7th at noon. Holy shit. That's another day that's going on the calendar. Actually, let me write that down right now. Jake Lang doing on March 7th. God, I'm like an adult or something. Okay. Jake Lang in NYC. Awesome. We'll definitely look forward to that. Let's see. Karlyn was right about everything. Isn't that just like my perpetual state of being? Sorry, guys. Excuse me. All right. No, I think my math is off as well, but Malcolm, I think my math is off as well, but I lost track. I think we had like, I think we had like 88 or something on the last stream, and then we had 115 on this one. It's roundabout, Malcolm. It's a rough estimate, okay? I'm not a fucking engineer. I'm not an engineer. I was doing math in my head while trying to rant on the internet. Okay, we're definitely over 200. I have the goals over. I have it as over 200. That's good. That's, I mean, great in and of itself. All right. If you have asked questions earlier in the chat, I'm not going to scroll through the chat and see them. So if you want to put your questions in the chat starting now, I'm looking in the chat now for questions. So if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I'm not scrolling back through the whole chat because we'd be here all night. We would be here all night. But if anyone else has questions, I'm happy to answer them. Just so you guys know, if you are new to my work, the very best place to start, if you haven't done it yet, is by heading over to my Substack. That is Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. And if you go here to new to my work, start here, you will be greeted with 3 presentations you can watch. Cynthia! Oh, shit! Cynthia, I'm losing my voice. Cynthia in with the W. We appreciate you, Cynthia, the goddess, the legend of the channel. I'm going to write a book someday called The Legend of Cynthia. The Legend of Cynthia, goddess of the chat. Guys, if you head over to my Substack and you go to the new to my work start here section, the very best place to start when you first encounter my work is to go right here. It's called Re-Education, an Anti-Communist Introduction to the Far Left. This is a presentation that you can watch that basically has over a dozen clips in it from real far left trainings where I'm breaking down what they are saying. I'm breaking down the language that they're using. I'm showing you what they're saying in the real world and all that good stuff. So that is really the best place to start if you're new and you're like, Karlyn, I'm like really overwhelmed by this language. That is the best place to start. If you feel like it, you can continue on to the 4-hour crash course, How to Speak Socialist, which is like an expanded version of it. That is 4 hours long and it goes in much greater depth. And if you really want the good stuff, you can watch the Introduction to Queer Marxism. I will be reprising these live classes this year at some point, but for right now, you can find them on demand. And that is a very, very, very good place to start. You can also find them on YouTube and Rumble, but Substack is the easiest. Dorfus, song request. You want it? You want the Gnostic Sex Cult song? Okay. All right, we can play the Gnostic Sex Cult. We can play it on the way out. We'll do that as an outro. Let me see. What is the cool necklace I'm wearing? That is a Gucci perfume bottle. And yes, it does actually have Gucci perfume in it. Fancy, fancy. Do they take a nonviolent stance for their revolution? Oh, no. Do you want me to show you the craziest thing that I discovered lately that conservatives haven't reported? Do you guys really want to see it? Do you want me to show you something none of your conservative influencers have shown you? Hang on. Hey, did you guys know that back in November, a new manifesto was released on the far left called Be Queer, Do Terrorism. So does the far left believe in nonviolence? Nope. The far left has been actively and perpetually rejecting the idea of nonviolence. We have seen this as a pattern all over the far left for the last year or so. There are all these manifestos and articles coming out saying, you know, the No Kings protests are nice, but, you know, this nonviolent stuff isn't really working. So if you want to read the Be Queer, Do Terrorism manifesto, I've covered it on the Substack. I've broken it down for you. And guess what? No conservative media outlet would report on it. Did you learn about this from Andy No? Nope. You want to know why? Because he didn't know about it. I was the only one to cover this. And then Andy No refused to cover it because I covered it because he didn't get there first because Andy No isn't a real journalist. Andy No outsources his journalism to other people. He doesn't even do it himself. Doesn't even live in the United States, by the way. Just goes on shows all the time saying, Antifa attacked me in 2016 and it was really sad and I was really embarrassed and Antifa doesn't like journalists. That's all Andy No does. He doesn't actually do real reporting on the far left. Everyone knows this, right? I put the link in the chat already. I'll put it in again. So you can go there and read the Be Queer, Do Terrorism manifesto and see what they're talking about. Cynthia, the legend of Cynthia in the chat with another 5 gifted channel memberships. Really appreciate it. But to be more serious about it, the far left believes, and we were actually talking about this over on Rumble a little bit. Here is the logic of the far left, okay? Capitalism is violence. Capitalism is oppressive violence all the time. They mean like actual violence. Because capitalism is a violence that is always oppressing us, we are allowed to use violence to fight against the evil capitalist regime. That is what they believe. They believe capitalism, private property ownership, is literally violence. That is literally enacting violence on the entire population by making them slaves. And in order to overthrow the capitalist system, they are allowed to use violence, actual physical violence, because capitalism is intrinsically violent, so they're allowed to respond with violence. That is the logic. Cynthia, you are too generous, Cynthia. You're making me feel guilty, but massive W's in the chat for Cynthia again. Cynthia, I'm going to get a new purse off of you today, and it's going to be rad. It's going to be awesome. Don't know what it's going to be yet. I'm starting to get much pickier about the purses I'm buying because I'm running out of space. I need to clear more space out of my closet to display more purses in order to buy more purses. So I'm starting to get picky about it. I'm like, maybe I don't need all the different color variations on that one purse I really like. Maybe one is just enough. Anyway. Guys, does anyone else have any other questions that I can answer? Are we good? Did you guys enjoy the spy streams today? 1 in the chat if you enjoyed the spy streams. 2 in the chat if you did not enjoy the spy streams. Yeah, Cynthia's colonizing us, literally. Literally. You guys like it? All right. Well, if you're new to the channel, guys, this is literally just the beginning. I will show you the craziest shit that you've never seen before. I will show you the craziest content on the internet that no one has ever shown you. It goes way deeper than this. So get ready, because we are, the reason the Plague Doctor is the logo on my channel is because, like, we're going into plague infested territories. That's what we're doing. We are going into the most dystopian possible territories. I don't know. I gotta schedule it. I just talked to the guy today. Like, relax. It'll get on the schedule when it gets on the schedule. Yeah, just wait till you guys learn that the left wants to grow. They want to grow children in bio bags. Here, check this out. Here's a sneak preview for everyone that's new. Oh, we should finish that. Let's do that tomorrow on the stream. Let's not do that tonight, but we definitely should finish that. Guys, here is a sneak preview for all the people who are new. Cynthia, Jesus. W's to Cynthia. Again, the legend of Cynthia continues. So, guys, here's what the left believes regarding growing children in bio bags. Okay. Get ready. Capitalism is defined as private property ownership. One of the things that the left considers to be a form of private property is parental rights. Parental rights over your kids are a form of private property ownership because parental rights means passing of personal privatized wealth from parent to child. It's the passing of generational wealth. It also has to do with universal health care. It also has to do with community care, collective care. But the short story is they consider parental rights over your kids to be a form of private property ownership. As a solution to this, some of the most radical queer Marxists are advancing the idea of literally growing children in bio bags as though you are cloning a sheep in order to eliminate parental rights and the nuclear family. And yes, I have this on video. They also believe that surrogacy could be an answer to the parental rights question. They have also advanced the idea, I shit you not, of incubating babies in the bodies of brain dead people. There was an actual journal article about this like 3 years ago. I covered it on my Substack at the time, where they actually advanced the idea of growing babies in the bodies of brain dead people, both women and men, by the way, because they think they can implant babies into brain dead bodies and use them as sort of like an incubator. You want to know where this goes? This goes to really dark places that most people have not dared venture. Cynthia in with another W. How many W's can one Cynthia have in a single stream? How many W's can one Cynthia have? Anyway, I'm going to leave you on that note. And, I stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Most days we cover the far left. Some days we do other stuff too. Cynthia apparently can have more W's in a single stream. So I just can everyone in the chat just give Cynthia just one massive wall of fucking W's? Because Cynthia is basically funding this entire channel at this point. No, that's not true. So many people have donated today, guys. I really want to take the time to appreciate not just Cynthia, who is, of course, our channel membership goddess, but I want to appreciate everyone that's donated channel memberships today. We've gotten at least 238 of them. So that's a lot of new channel members. Welcome to everyone who got a free channel membership today. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate everyone who has sent in super chats. I am 100% independently funded. I can only do this because you guys allow me to do it. I don't work for any companies. I don't work for any political entities. I have no political narrative. I have no political talking points. I don't even care who you vote for because I don't fucking vote because fuck those people. Like, I don't care. My job is to show up and to show you guys what's going on, to tell you the truth, to break it down and explain it to you so you understand it. And I appreciate everyone who allows me to do this because I can't do it without your help. I stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. I will be back at 5 p.m. tomorrow. I do Socialism Saturdays on Saturdays at 6 p.m. If there is protest coverage, I will do that as well. And, oh yeah, I'm going to play out with the Gnostic Sex Cult song today. I'm going to play out with the Gnostic Sex Cult song. So guys, I hope you'll mount the like button on the way out the door. I hope you will subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And I hope I'll see you back next time. So that's it for today. Let me get the Gnostic Sex Cult song up. Yo, thank you, Grillis, for the super chat. I appreciate that. Or the super sticker. Thanks for being you, bro. You rock. Where the hell is the Gnostic Sex Cult song? There it is. Boom. All right, guys. Till next time. We'll see you soon.
Obsessed with lying to his audience. What crazy things can he get them to believe? He does it irresponsibly to pocket all that money from the mills for liberty. The left hates capitalism, but James won't admit it. He refuses to believe queer theory destabilizes normativity. Gender binary in the nuclear family. Change blocks the truth, smears people who try to show him. Creates an echo chamber for himself to reinforce his fantasy. He used to believe in something. What happened? Mills for liberty. Gnostic sex cult, building his own world. A Gnostic sex cult, unhinged from reality. Totally lost in what can we do? But mocking relentlessly. It's not a Gnostic sex cult, James. No, it's not. Stop lying to your audience. No, it's not. It's not Gnostic change. Grab Mary Nardini tells us queer liberation means the annihilation of capitalism. Catch up, James. Whiteness means capitalism. Queer theory hates capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism. Queer theory hates capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism. It's all about capitalism. Everyone knows it's capitalism. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James. It's capitalism. Whoa. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James. It's capitalism. It's all about capitalism. Everyone knows it's capitalism. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James, it's capitalism. It's capitalism. To pocket all that money from the mills for liberty. Capitalism, but James won't admit it. He refuses to believe queer theory stabilizes normativity. Gender binary in the nuclear family, but James blocks the truth. Smears people who try to show him. Creates an echo chamber for himself to reinforce his fantasy. To believe in something. What happens for liberty? Gnostic sex cult, building his own world. Gnostic sex cult, unhinged from reality. He's totally lost it. What can we do but mock him relentlessly?